Hi bakers, in this video I'm going to show you how to make a chocolate sauce. So in this pan I have my cocoa powder, granulated sugar, water, and corn syrup. And I'm going to go ahead and get that mixed together while I have that on a pretty high heat. This sauce is pretty simple, so basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring this mixture up to a boil. So this is all my ingredients except for my chocolate, which you can see over to the side. I have my chocolate. So I'm whisking this just to make sure I get all that cocoa powder nice and dissolved. I don't want any clumps of cocoa powder, and I don't want any of the kind of thicker corn syrup or sugar sticking to the bottom that could burn. I do want to be careful as I go because chocolate does tend to burn. Cocoa powder is much harder to burn than regular chocolate, but it still can. So I don't want the flames kind of coming up the side of my pot. And you can see I've gotten it already nice and combined. So I'm going to bring this to a boil. And by doing that, I'm going to kind of take some of the raw flavor out of the cocoa powder. It's kind of almost got like this chalkiness about it. So by cooking it, it's going to have like a much more rounder chocolate flavor. It's going to be pretty important for our sauce. So you could also do this kind of simply by making a thin chocolate ganache if you wanted to. If you remember making chocolate ganache, it's a mixture of heavy cream, hot heavy cream added to chocolate, and then we stir it to melt. And you'll see that with the Flourless chocolate cake, we'll do that chocolate ganache again. So you could do that with a high ratio of heavy cream. But this chocolate sauce method kind of gives you a much more powerful chocolate flavor than a really thin ganache would. And it also gives you this really deep, rich, dark color that's really nice. I'm just turning down my heat because I'm noticing that the edges are kind of getting a little itty-bitty scorched. So that just means my flame's coming up too far up the sides of my pot. And I don't want that. I don't want... Chocolate already has, some bitterness to it. I don't want to add any bitterness by scorching anything. And you can see as I'm moving the whisk, I'm making sure I'm kind of touching every part of the pot, not just stirring in the center. I'm getting into the corners. And I'm getting over to the sides as I go, so I make sure it's not sticking anywhere. Like I said, this can certainly burn. So with sauces, we always need to think about a thickener. And my thickener is going to be the chocolate today. So when chocolate is cool, it is solid. So that's how it acts as a thickener. As soon as we cool this sauce, and actually as soon as we add the chocolate, you'll see that it'll thicken. Just melted chocolate is already kind of thicker, certainly than a sauce. But as it cools, it's going to continue to thicken our chocolate sauce. So chocolate's not a super common thickener for sauce, obviously, because it does impart flavor. So you wouldn't want to use chocolate maybe to thicken a raspberry sauce because you would kind of ruin the color and the flavor of the raspberry sauce. But maybe you would. Maybe that's exactly what you're looking for, is a chocolate raspberry sauce. So you got to think about that before you use chocolate as a thickener. All right, so I am seeing some bubbles now. And I always cook just for a couple of seconds at boiling just to make sure that I've cooked off that, kind of raw cocoa powder flavor. I can also taste it at this point, but sometimes I'll just cook it just a little bit extra just to make sure. So I've turned off the heat, and I'm going to take it off the heat, and you can see it's nice and hot. I'm going to add that chocolate in, and I'm going to stir, and that heat that's in that sauce is going to melt my chocolate. So I just want to stir until all of my chocolate is melted. I definitely want to make sure all the chocolate is melted, though. If I don't make sure it's melted and combined, what can happen is it can kind of melt and just kind of stay in a pocket, and then when I cool it, it solidifies back into hard chocolate because it's not mixed all the way in. And then you have these little weird chocolate chips in your sauce, which isn't pleasant to eat, and also is really frustrating if you're trying to get like a really pretty plate design. So I'm going to be really, really cautious to stir this until all that chocolate is melted. It's always a good idea that if you think it's melted all the way, you kind of keep going. That corn syrup in this recipe sure does add sweetness, but just so you know, it definitely adds some shine, which hopefully you can see in this video that the sauce is very, very shiny. So I brought my sauce over to my workstation, and I put it on a half sheet pan because we have butcher block tables, and I don't want to burn my table. And now I'm pouring it into a bowl, which is over an ice bath because I need this to cool down quickly so I can get it stored and put away. So So make sure I'm scraping out all that chocolate sauce. Remember, in this industry, we have very small profit margins, so we never want to waste anything. So I can use this ice bath and I can stir it so that it cools really nice and evenly. And hopefully you can actually see that it's already starting to thicken as it gets cooler. So this chocolate sauce will continue to thicken as it cools. And this is a pretty intense chocolate sauce, so it actually gets a little too thick in the refrigerator. So what I'll do is I'll warm it up a little bit before service. So you can see now how thick it's gotten, and it's not at refrigerator temperature yet. So that's awesome. So you kind of get to decide when you're making your chocolate sauce. Do you want it to be extra chocolatey, so it's a little thicker, or do you want it to be not quite as chocolatey? Maybe that's not going to fit with your dessert quite as well. So these are things that you have to think about as a pastry chef. But this is a kind of a good all-around chocolate sauce. It's nice and rich and chocolatey. So I may have to warm it up either quickly in a microwave, or I can put it in a container with the bottle in a container with some hot water. So I'll go ahead and pour this into my squirt bottle because it's going to make it a lot easier to plate. I don't have to put it in a squirt bottle. It kind of, again, depends on how I'm using it to plate, but using a squirt bottle is really, really helpful, especially if you're doing huge quantities of plated desserts. It makes for very quick and clean work. So a squirt bottle is a great, great tool. One little funny tip that I like to recommend is to smell your bottles, especially if you share equipment with a culinary side. I've had this in the industry many times where they've used the same squeeze bottles for maybe a vinaigrette or something like that have really strong smells. And then that smell still kind of stays in the bottle, and we don't want that in our chocolate sauce. So clearly in this video, I'm trying too hard to get all the chocolate out, not noticing that my squeeze bottle is filling up because I'm looking at the camera, not at what I'm doing. But you definitely want to be more cautious than that. So I'm going to have to quickly take out my funnel and try to not make a mess. And really, that should have been with gloves because that is ready to eat food. So I'm going to go ahead and get this wrapped up. So I put my saran wrap over the surface, and then I can get the lid and put it on. And that's going to ensure that it stays nice and fresh. The lids don't always have tops. They're usually lost. I can kind of clean up the mess I made. But yeah, this lid that I'm using does have a top, you can see, but a lot of times they've broken off or they just never existed anyway. So that saran wrap is going to make sure it stays nice and fresh. And also, if you were doing an away catering event, it would help make sure you didn't spill your sauce. So now I'm just putting a label and date, chocolate sauce, and the date. And I'm going to put the lid on, and I'm going to put this in the refrigerator to cool down until I'm ready to serve.